IVM.
Hi, I'm Utsav, a behavior researcher by training and a slow traveler by passion. Postcards from Nowhere is a travel podcast where I condense a decade of travel experiences and explore not just the where, but also the why and how to travel. My stories emerge from slow traveling the less explored parts of the world: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Armenia, Uzbekistan, and even China. At the end of each story, I give practical tips and new ideas about how to travel better.
This week, like our guest Pritam Sukumar, we take the road less traveled. He cycled through Asia and Europe for 9 months, and our conversations ranged from mindfulness of cycling and writing about negative travel experiences to the generosity of strangers and the idea of home. Tune in as we cycle through Pritam's thoughts and experiences of being a citizen of the road. 28 beats per minute. This isn't the heart rate of a man with bradycardia, a medical condition when the heart can't pump enough oxygen-rich blood to the body. This is the resting heart rate of Miguel Induri. While regular people have a resting heart rate of anywhere between 60 to 100 beats per minute, Miguel's body, however, has different needs. From 1991 to 1995, he won the Tour de France 5 times. For the uninitiated, it's a 23-day multi-stage cycle race across France and easily one of the most grueling sporting events in the world, with impossible climbs being added each year. But the man I spoke with probably does not track his heart rate obsessively. In fact, he's not even a competitive professional cyclist. And yet, he cycled over 7,000 kilometers from Tajikistan to Slovenia. Some of his climbs in Tajikistan would rival those in the Tour de France. He cycled for over 4 months in Central Asia, traversing Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Iran. Eventually, it took him 9 months to get from Tajikistan to Slovenia. But such a feat is not achieved in a day. Pritam's journey started much earlier.
I was working at Amazon from 2013 to 15, and I was in Seattle in the US. I mean, it's not a very romantic answer, but I was basically making more money than I was spending. So, and I thought, why? What is the point? And after a year in Amazon, I started reading travel blogs of people who were traveling around the world. And this number popped up that if you have $20,000, you can travel around the world for a year. And I thought that I have $20,000 at this moment. And where I have no loans, nobody is depending on me for money, nobody is depending on me for time, there was nobody I had to take care of. So I thought, why not? But still a little scared. So I gave myself a year to back out of this decision. It's a very conscious decision that I said I will give myself a year to back out. I'll give my dad 1 year to convince me not to do it. I'll give my brother 1 year to convince me not to do it. And they tried. But by the end of the year, I was even more feeling that I can do this. And there is nothing in my life stopping me from just leaving. So I left in August 2015. And then I traveled for 4 years full time after that. What started off as 1 year and then maybe work or whatever, ended with 4 years of full time travel. And the last 9 months was on the cycle, which started in Central Asia and ended in Europe.
It's not a romantic story. One of the most refreshing things about Pritam is how honest he is about his life. He runs a blog on Substack, and his writing isn't like most travel writing you would encounter. Short, punchy sentences with no grandiose reflections. No put-on profoundness. There are no moments of epiphany, but a simple acceptance of his privilege, both of time and money. He's acutely aware that he's lucky to be able to do this. But his journey of 4 years did not begin with cycling. It began with walking. 700 miles from the end of Switzerland to the end of France. Walking anywhere between 6 to 8 hours a day. Every day for 25 days.
And they talk about a long 700-kilometer hike in France, which goes from Lake Geneva to Nice. And it goes all along the Alps, along the France, Italy, Switzerland border. And I thought, why not try this? And why not do this? And at the same time, I happened to read a book called Tracks by Robin Davidson. This is about a woman who walked across Australia by herself. She took a year. She walked by herself. She was attacked by camels, and she learned how to ride camels before the before she spent like, I don't know, 6 months in a farm learning how to ride camels. Then she walked across with her own camel and she was attacked by wild animals. She had someone taught her to use a gun. There's a lot. It's a really amazing book. Like if anybody wants to read it, they absolutely should. And that book had a lot of quotes that inspired me. It was like all about how life, what you said, like how our experiences don't feel real many times. I feel that a lot, like as you probably can see from my blog posts. And so I thought, why not do this now? And I was already 31 at the time, and all the travel bloggers who were writing were in their 20s. And I thought it's only going to get harder as time goes. So I'm already on the later end of this travel spectrum. But that turned out to be not so important after I started traveling because nobody cared. Like even 19-year-old boys and girls were traveling from Europe on year-long trips around the world, and they didn't care that I was 31, and I didn't care that they were 19. I don't think there was anything big though. It was just a sequence of small little things that kept building up to quitting.
Pritam realized fairly quickly that on the road, age did not matter. What mattered was the pace.
So I was doing this 9 to 5 hiking, and in the middle I thought like this is becoming like a job. And at that moment I sort of consciously slowed down a bit, tried to experience things, but it wasn't so hard. Like even the hard sections, hiking is just every step you take is like one step closer to where you're going. So if you just keep taking these steps, small steps, and you'll get there. Like it's not, I've never thought of hiking as especially difficult. Maybe mountaineering is difficult, but I think hiking is, it's just persistence. You just keep going.
Putting one step after another is exactly how Paul Salopek describes walking. He's on a 10-year journey of walking the world. He says, walking is falling forward. Each step we take is an arrested plunge, a collapse averted, a disaster break. In this way, to walk becomes an act of faith. During the 700-mile walk, there was a moment where Pritam transformed into what I would like to call him, a reluctant philosopher.
Cree feel like a former glacier's remnants, I guess. So I heard like the crunch of gravel under my feet. I felt the wind in my face. There were no trees. And suddenly I had this, I call it my moment of peace. It's also kind of silly, but when I was thinking about leaving, I told my dad, during all our conversations about me leaving to travel, I told him that I'm looking for peace, authenticity, and adventure. I made up these keywords to like help show him what I was trying to do. And like this was one of those moments where I felt really peaceful, like everything, and I was alone at that point, and everything seemed to be like perfect in a way. And that really helped. I mean, it did last because I still felt the pain in my legs and I wanted to get to the refuge, and I was wondering what there would be for dinner. So it was not like I was caught up only in the present, but it was still a really nice feeling that really pushed me, because I've had this feeling many times since then, and each moment has been a little special in its own way.
Peace, authenticity, adventure. But the reluctant philosopher also records his not so pleasant experiences on the road. A brown man on a cycle who had probably gone a few days without a bath, his clothes dusty from cycling dirt tracks. A brown man on a cycle who had probably gone a few days without a bath, his clothes dusty from cycling dirt tracks, brings its own share of challenges. He has been mugged in Buenos Aires, shaken down at border crossings in Iran, Afghanistan and Turkey, and has seen outright racism in Slovenia.
I try not to hide from writing these memories, or not even from myself or from the Substack or as the case used to be, Instagram. I feel like the honesty is important because I write because I want to share what I experienced, and it wasn't always good. So this should be clear in whatever I write. It was overwhelmingly good, but not always good.
Pritam also identifies with the universal struggle of a travel writer, something I have dealt with extensively in the 4 years I have been doing this show. How does the capturing of an experience change over time? What happens in the gap between us experiencing something and us writing about it? Which of the two is the actual experience?
No, I struggle with it a lot because every post is slightly different. Because even the recent post about belonging, I originally meant it as a post starting with, I didn't belong then, but I belong now. But as I was writing the post, I realized that it wasn't even true, that I didn't belong then, and it's not true that I don't belong now, and even the opposite is not true. Like every post, I think about this a lot, whether what should be the point of the post, right? What is the most honest, what is the most real point that I want to make with this post? Because every experience, especially while traveling, has like many layers to it. Like you meet someone and they tell you their story, but at the same time, you are having, I don't know, the best burger of your life or the best steak in some restaurant. And so there are many different things happening at the same time. So I feel like when I write a post, I want to spend some time thinking about which thing should the post be about. And I tend to like cut out the rest of the stuff, even though sometimes it's important. And I try to limit the focus to one thing. But choosing this thing is always a struggle. Like I want it to be one thing, but sometimes it's really hard.
3 years after having hit the road, Pritam was planning his return to India, and he wanted to slow down again.
So I was in England at the end of 2018, like around August, September. I was in my uncle's place in England. I decided I would come to India after that because I thought I will continue traveling. But so I was just looking for slow ways to get back to India. Like just thinking that I don't need to go directly back to India, fly back from London to Bangalore or whatever. But I stop, like I can travel to a few places on the way. And I was just looking at the map, then I thought, oh, Europe is connected by land to India. Like, why not try motorcycling is what the first thought that came to mind. And I researched a bit about motorcycles, and it turns out you have to have a passport for the motorcycle. You have to have like a international, I don't know, some sort of thing that says that this vehicle is valid to cross country borders. So it seemed like a lot of documentation. So that's when I started thinking about cycling, and I started watching YouTube videos. And then I thought, okay, I will cycle from England to India, not to India probably because, Pakistan doesn't give visas, and the other side is through China and that passes through Tibet, where it's impossible to cycle on your own and you need a guide, car and everything. So I thought I'll cycle as far as I can. But it was already September when I was planning this. So if I had started this cycling trip then, I would have been passing through like Tajikistan and all this in extreme winter when everything is covered in snow and it would be impossible. Even the many roads get closed. But then my mind had switched from coming back to India to just doing the cycling trip because I was already excited about it. So I decided I will fly to Tajikistan, or rather my plan was to start in Kyrgyzstan, but and I'll fly there and then cycle back to Europe and then fly back to India. Like it's not a very well thought out plan. Like now looking back, it seems kind of strange that if I want to go back to India, why would I cycle the other way? But and I didn't have any cycle touring experience. I didn't know what kind of cycle to buy. So I was just sitting in my uncle's house looking on Facebook for used cycles, and there was some guy in London who was selling his old cycle, which he said he'd gone on 2-week tours and 1-month tours. So I thought, okay, if he's gone on 1-month tours, it must be a good cycle. So I just went to London, bought it, flew to Tajikistan, and that's how it started.
For someone like me who has been traveling on and off for over a decade, I'm absolutely in awe of Pritam. Not because he's been traveling continuously for 4 years, but the fact that he's a man without a plan. The 700-mile GR5 hike was on a whim, and so was the plan to cycle from Asia to Europe. He has had no endurance training and did not over-research the bike he should be buying. He just went with the flow, not for a day, not for a week, but for years altogether. But as Lance Armstrong reminds us in his autobiography, it's not about the bike.
Cycling is difficult physically, especially like even without the high altitudes. The mountain passes in Tajikistan are like really high and I mean really steep. Get to the pass, it's a steep climb every time. But in the first month, it was really difficult. Not just the physical thing. The physical thing, I kind of got used to it because I've been hiking a lot. I think I was okay physically and I didn't have any distance goals that I had to meet every day. Like I just thought, let's try this and see how it goes. Like I would, but mental part took some time to get used to because I had to get into this state where I really didn't care about how long I was going. I would cycle at maybe 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the afternoon because it was already October, so the days were a little short. I think by 5:30 or 6 it was getting dark. So I would cycle till 3:30 or 4 o'clock maybe and start looking for a campsite. And when I found a campsite, I just camped. Like it didn't matter if I was super close to the pass, or it didn't matter if 20 kilometers later there was a city. None of that mattered. And I just camped when I thought like, okay, this is a spot where people really can't see me, or if someone sees me, it's okay, they're nice. And I would just pitch my tent and camp there. And equipment wise, I was not prepared at all. Like I entered Tajikistan in the middle of September, I think. And by the time I reached the end of the Pamir highway, like it was really cold. I was one of the last people, last normal cycle tourists to pass through this region, because after it was already November, I think. And it was extremely cold. There were nights where I camped in temperatures of minus 25. And minus 25 was at a lower altitude. There was no thermometer where I was. There was no weather station, so I didn't know the exact temperature. And it was cold. The water was freezing. You would boil water, but by the time you drank it, it was already cold. So I think that my inexperience helped. Like I wasn't fully prepared for what I was getting into, because I think if I was an experienced cyclist, I wouldn't have done this in winter or at the start of winter. So in a way, like you could say, I wasn't prepared mentally or physically. It just happened that cycling is easy in a way, because you just go, you camp in the evening, you wake up in the morning and you repeat it again. And every day the scenery is changing, the people are changing. So it's also very pleasant. Yeah, and that's how it happened.
As you continue to slow down, Pritam makes a distinction between the two modes of cycling itself. Riding with a set goal in mind in terms of speed and distance, and riding without goals. The difference is mindfulness.
Days when I had to meet a distance target, especially in Uzbekistan, because when I entered Uzbekistan, it was already getting to be high season, so the hostels were getting full. So between the big cities, I would have 3 days to cycle 250 kilometers or 300 kilometers. And the first 2 days, I would be following my usual philosophy of just finding a spot on the highway to camp or whatever. On the last day, suddenly I would have 120 kilometers to do on the same day. And in the morning, I would still be a little relaxed and enjoying the scenery, as you put it. But after lunch, it would get really a little stressful, because I would be really focused on the goal. Like even once, I remember as I was approaching Tashkent, after crossing the Tajikistan border, I had a hostel booked, so I wanted to get there. And it was getting to be evening. And there I stopped for a samsa, as they call it, on the roadside. And the dhaba guy was like, he was very impressed that I was cycling and that I was Indian. And, the usual Amitabh Bachchan comments came. He wanted to take a photo with me. He didn't want me to pay for the food. This happens a lot while cycling, and usually I enjoy it a lot. But at this moment, I was like, oh no, I have to get to the hostel before it's dark. Sorry, I have to leave. And I just left kind of quickly. And I think, so you're absolutely right. Like if there is a distance goal, it makes it a little stressful to plan. And in fact, even to this day, when my wife and I discuss travel plans, I always hesitate to book a guest house for the next day, which is a little, I think, a throwback from the cycling days, because I feel that it was so easy then that you were just on the road, and you would stop whenever you want, camp wherever you want with whatever limited thing was there, and then just start again the next day.
Oh yeah, Pritam met his wife Anya while volunteering on a farm in Slovenia. And unlike the show, if he ever has kids, they have a really good story of how I met your mother. You can find the link to that post in the show notes.
There are quite a few differences in the way at least I experience them. Walking is, of course, slower, and it's walking, you really have to think of where you will get to by the end of the day, because cycling, you have this freedom that, you can, even if there is 50 kilometers left at night, you can just do it. Walking, you will walk, at least at my pace, you'll walk a maximum of, 40 kilometers in one day and not more. So you have to sort of have a mental map in your head. I think walking requires slightly more planning, but also cycling, you feel the road much more, or the trail. Like even while walking, you feel that you're going uphill and downhill, but cycling, I think the difference between the uphill and downhill is so big, and it's like a revelation that, okay, this is uphill and this is downhill. And I think there is a quote which I vaguely remember by Ernest Hemingway, which says something similar, that cycling is when you truly get to know the road, like what is up, what is down, because everything is like on those two wheels and you're pushing hard to get uphill, which is not, you experience it while walking, but not to the same extent, I would say. Cycling also is very similar. Like you are really at the mercy of the elements. In fact, it's a little harder than walking because, for example, if it's snowing or if it's even if it's raining, like walking, still you wear your jacket and the rain, it does bother you. But I think the amount of bother is just at a slightly higher level with cycling because the rain is in your face. You even if you cover your head, it still hits your face and you can't cover your eyes. You can't wear glasses to protect your eyes because the glasses will get wet. Like while cycling on snow, you tend to end up walking because the cycle slips a lot. So there is this extra correct, like it's almost like you would think that having the cycle would separate you from the ground underneath you, but actually it's like a connection that gets stronger, I think, because you're really feeling what is under your feet. Cycling on gravel is so different from cycling on road. It's so different from crossing a river with a cycle. Whereas walking, they're all slightly different from each other. I don't know if that makes sense.
I've never thought about cycling this way. I've always felt the more machines you add between the ground and you, the more detached one is from the elements of the surroundings. It's only when I spoke with Pritam that I realized that in cycling, you are the engine, and the engine feels every bit of the environment it is in. The other engine which keeps running is your mind. What goes on in your mind when you are cycling over 100 kilometers in a day? Does one grapple with the larger, more philosophical questions? Or is one so immersed in the present that there is no space for the larger questions?
If you think about all the things, like the big questions come once in a while, like you're thinking philosophical questions about why am I cycling, or on the other hand, why don't I keep cycling all my life? Like, why should I stop? Because that was really, after a few months on the road, I really felt like this, that I'll become one of these cyclists who keep cycling for years together. I was listening to audiobooks while cycling and you're thinking about what these guys are saying and why they're saying it. And you're also really thinking about the mundane stuff also because the way I cycled was that I would have rice and dal, masoor dal usually because that is the most common dal in all these places. And I would have some spices and oil and I would buy whatever vegetables were on the road. So after lunch, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I would have for dinner. Like, should I make khichdi or should I make dal and rice separately or should I put like everything in one pot and see what happens, or should I not eat dal today, or should I buy not quinoa, what's it called, Italian thing, polenta? Should I buy polenta for tomorrow? Like this was a very common thought in my mind. So I would say it's a mix of the big things and the small things. And what I would do after cycling, after I finished my trip, was a thought that was on my mind a lot, especially as I got closer and closer to Europe. So my plan was to end in Switzerland. And as I entered Europe, I really started thinking, what should I do next? What should I do next? And yeah, that's how it was going every day.
And in such long journeys, replete with profound and mundane thoughts, one encounters the generosity of people along the way.
All through Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and Iran after, like the people were just amazing. Like I always say this, like when I started the cycling trip, it was me and this girl from Belgium who was also cycling. I mean, she was hitchhiking, but she started to cycle. But we were cycling together for a week. And in the first week, we didn't pay for food. We didn't pay for stay. We didn't ever pitch our tents. We were invited every day to sleep somewhere, eat. We would get lunch. We would get bread to pack. It's only when I entered the real mountains and there were stretches where there were no people that I actually had to take out my tent. It was just that some guy, we would ask in a hotel if, like in a restaurant, whether we could eat. And I mean, we didn't even, like, we would even ask, like, can you translate the menu? Like, is this, because I think she was vegetarian, if I remember correctly, like, is this vegetarian? And he would refuse to let us pay. This was on the third day and he let us sleep in the restaurant for the night. When we woke up, he would come with breakfast. So there were many, many, many experiences like this on the way. The hospitality was wonderful in all these countries. Like I was even warned by WhatsApp people. I will not reveal them. But yeah, these are Muslim countries. You should be really careful and this and that. And my experience was completely the opposite. Like, in fact, while traveling in India, I never faced this kind of hospitality. And yeah, it was amazing. All three countries. In Uzbekistan, I never stayed at a local's house, but there was a lot of free food. In Iran, like, I hardly spent any money because every day someone was taking me to their house, making me meet their family, giving me the best piece of chicken and so on.
This, I'm happy to attest, I am no stranger to. I have drunk the milk of human kindness, felt warmed by the generosity of strangers, and found a connection with people I have nothing in common with.
Home is where there is space for me to think and just relax. I mean, not relax, but maybe be like a place where there is space to do this. And for me in the cities, this is really hard. And even while traveling, like, I think that's why I like cycling so much, because it really was like the whole day was full of space because I was alone most of the time. Even if there was, like, I think that's another thing that differentiates cycling from walking, that even if you are with someone, you're not like talking to them really while cycling because you're on your own trips together, sort of. And so I think that is what really constitutes home for me. It's really not connected to the place. It's more connected to just if have this, I'll say those three words again. Just if I have the opportunity for this peace, to be peaceful, to be authentic to who I am, to not have to like put on a mask for anyone around me, and to have enough things to do to feel adventurous.
I find it hard to sum up my conversation with Pritam. I've never experienced most things he has, and yet I can find parallels with some of his thoughts from my own slow traveling days. What resonated with me the most was the idea of home being a space to think and just to be. I'll leave you with some of my favorite lines from Alan de Botton's The Art of Travel. Journeys are the midwives of thought. Few places are more conducive to internal conversations than a moving plane, ship, or train. There's an almost quaint correlation between what is in front of our eyes and the thoughts we are able to have in our heads. Large thoughts, at times requiring large views. New thoughts, new places. Introspective reflections which are liable to stall are helped along by the flow of the landscape. The mind may be reluctant to think properly when thinking is all it is supposed to do. At the end of hours of train dreaming, we may feel we have been returned to ourselves, that is, brought back into contact with emotions and ideas of importance to us. It is not necessarily at home that we best encounter our true selves.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I am Utsav Memory on Twitter and YVTravel42 on Instagram.